Here is the English translation of the story. The smell of pure vanilla and dark chocolate, which usually soothed Clara's soul, tasted like the bitter flavor of failure in the early hours of that morning. It was 2:50 a.m. The industrial kitchen of Dolce Vita, her small confectionery studio in the old quarter of the city, was too silent. The constant, comforting hum of the industrial oven, the heart of her business, had stopped. It had simply died, taking with it the 300 macarons and the 3-tier wedding cake that needed to be delivered at 8 a.m. Clara ran a hand through her curly hair, leaving a trail of flour on her sweaty forehead. The heat of the summer night was suffocating, but the cold running down her spine was worse. If she didn't deliver this order, the contract would be cancelled. Without the payment, the late rent would result in eviction the following week. End of the line. Work, please, work. She begged, lightly kicking the metal base of the oven. Nothing. Not even a pilot light. With fingers trembling from anxiety, she grabbed the crumpled piece of paper where she had written down the number of a 24-hour emergency technician a supplier had recommended. Carleo Repairs, late night. It was her only chance. She typed the number into her cell phone, her eyes burning from holding back tears. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Hello? The voice that answered was not a Carleo. There was no sound of tools in the background, nor the impatience of someone who had just been woken up. It was a deep, grave, and frighteningly calm voice. A voice that seemed to vibrate in the air, rich like the dark chocolate ganache she prepared, but with a cutting edge, like cold steel. Clara was too desperate to notice the nuance of danger. "Thank God you answered," she blurted out, her voice choked. "Look, I know it's late, I know it's terrible, but I'm desperate. It stopped working. It simply died in the middle of the process, and I have things inside that need heat right now, or I'm going to lose everything." There was silence on the other end. A dense, evaluating silence. "You need heat?" The male voice repeated the words slowly. There was a huskiness there, a low, velvety tone that made the hairs on Clara's arms stand up, despite the heat of the kitchen. It didn't sound like a technician speaking. It sounded like something else. "Yes." Clara almost shouted, exasperated. "It won't heat up. And I have a huge delivery in the morning. If I can't make this work now, my life is over. I'll pay double, triple the visit fee. Please, I'm alone here and I don't know what to do." The man let out a low sound, almost an amused purr. "You are alone, need heat, and are willing to pay any price?" He paused deliberately. "That is a very dangerous introduction to make to a stranger at 3 in the morning, little one." Clara froze. The realization hit her. That tone of authority, the perfect diction, the aura of power that transpired even over the phone. That was not the technician. You aren't Carleo Repairs, are you?" she whispered, feeling her face burn with shame. "Definitely not," the man replied. His voice became even more intimate, as if he were speaking directly into her ear. "But now I'm curious. Who are you and why are you so desperate for heat on my private line?" I'm sorry. I dialed the wrong number." Clara pulled the phone away from her ear to hang up, but his voice stopped her. "Don't hang up. It was an order. Simple, direct, non-negotiable." Clara stopped with her finger hovering over the red button. Why was she obeying? Maybe it was the desperation. Maybe it was the loneliness. Or maybe it was the fact that that voice was the most magnetic thing she had ever heard in her life. "What broke, little one?" he asked. Now the tone was less predatory and more curious. "My oven," Clara confessed, feeling ridiculous. "I'm a confectioner. I have an old Italian industrial oven that decided to quit on the worst night of my life. An oven, he repeated, and she swore she could hear a smile in his voice. And you are alone in your studio, covered in flour and sugar, I presume? And sweat and tears, she completed, without a filter. And about to go bankrupt. What is your name? Clara. Clara. He tested the name, savoring the vowels. A luminous name for a dark night. I am Matteo. Matteo, I'm sorry to wake you, I'll try to find the right number. Forget the right number. No one answers in Sao Paulo at this hour, except the police and men like me. And you don't want either of those, normally. But today is your lucky day. What do you mean? I mean I detest waste, Clara. Be it of talent, or of sweets. Where is your confectionery? Clara's self-preservation instinct screamed. Don't give the address to a stranger with the voice of a sexual predator. But then she looked at the cold oven. At the raw dough. At the eviction notice in the drawer. Rua dos Gardenias, 12. The brick building with the green door. I know the area. Matteo's voice became serious, professional, but still charged with that latent sensuality. Stay on the line. I'm going to make a call on another device. Are you a technician? Matteo laughed. It was a short, deep, incredibly sexy sound that reverberated in Clara's chest. I fix problems, Clara. Of all kinds. Let's say I have resources. She heard him speak to someone in the background, his voice muffled, giving rapid orders in Italian. Italian. Mio Dio. The accent was subtle, but it was there. Done, he returned to the line. In 20 minutes, a team will be there. A team? Clara widened her eyes. I don't have money for a team. I didn't say I would charge, Matteo replied smoothly. Consider it an investment. I have a weakness for sweets, and for desperate voices in the middle of the night asking me for help. Why are you doing this? Clara asked, her voice faltering. You don't even know me. Exactly. Mystery is the best seasoning, don't you think? Besides. His voice dropped to a husky whisper that made Clara's legs tremble. I am bored. And saving a confectioner in distress seems much more interesting than what I was doing. Thank you, Matteo. I don't even know how to thank you. Ah, you will know. One day, I will collect this favor. Not in money. Clara's heart raced. The warning sounded dangerous, yes, but it also sounded like a promise. A promise that they would meet. They are arriving. Open the door only when you hear 3 knocks in a row. And Clara? Yes. Try not to burn yourself when things heat up again. The call ended. Clara stood frozen in the middle of the silent kitchen, holding the cell phone against her chest. The panic over the broken oven had vanished, replaced by an electric tension that made her skin tingle. She didn't know who Matteo was, but she knew she had just made a pact with someone very powerful. 20 minutes later, an unmarked black van stopped in front of the shop. 3 men got out. They didn't look like technicians. They wore impeccable black suits, but carried heavy toolboxes. They fixed the oven in 10 minutes. They replaced a burnt part with military efficiency, tested the temperature, and left without saying a single word, only nodding to her with respect. When the oven roared back to life, filling the kitchen with heat, Clara felt a mixture of relief and vertigo. As she put the cakes into bake, her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from the same unknown number. I hope it is sweet. M. Clara smiled at the screen, biting her lower lip. She was saved. But deep down, she knew she was lost. Matteo had entered her life like a silent storm, and she had the feeling the rain was just beginning. The adrenaline of the early morning had evaporated, leaving in its place a heavy, sweet exhaustion. Clara had done it. The 3-tier wedding cake, a work of art in Sicilian lemon chiffon and white chocolate ganache, had been delivered flawlessly at 8 a.m. The macarons, perfectly smooth and colorful, were already being devoured in some luxurious ballroom. Now, at 5 p.m., Dolce Vita was bathed in the golden light of the late afternoon. The smell of burnt butter and confectioner's sugar still hung in the air, but the shop was empty. Clara was behind the glass counter, absent-mindedly wiping a flour stain on the polished wood, fighting to keep her eyes open. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the usual shrill, cheerful chime. It seemed to sound deeper, slower. Clara looked up, and the cleaning cloth fell from her hand. The man who entered occupied the space in a way no customer ever had. He was tall, much taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of a navy blue suit made to measure, Italian cut, no doubt. He wore no tie, and the top two buttons of his white shirt were open, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin and the strong curve of his neck. But it was his face that stole the air from Clara's lungs. Strong features, a square jaw covered by stubble designed with precision. And the eyes, they were dark, intense, like strong espresso, fixed on her with predatory precision. He closed the door behind him, muffling the sounds of the street. The silence in the shop changed texture. It became electric. He walked to the counter. Every step was silent, deliberate, like a feline circling prey. "The smell here is intoxicating," he said. The voice. It was the same voice. The same husky, velvety baritone that had guided her in the early morning, but now, without the distortion of the phone, it was even more potent. It vibrated in Clara's chest, awakening nerve endings she didn't even know existed. "Matteo," she whispered, the name coming out like an involuntary confession. A slow, almost lazy smile curved his lips. It wasn't a kind smile, it was the smile of someone who knows exactly the effect he has. "Ciao, Clara." He stopped on the other side of the glass, resting his hands on the counter. Large hands, with long, strong fingers, an expensive watch gleaming on his left wrist. Clara suddenly felt very conscious of her own appearance, the apron stained with cocoa, her hair tied in a messy bun, the dark circles of someone who hadn't slept. "You came," she said, trying to regain her professional composure, but failing miserably. "I said I would collect the favor," he replied, his eyes scanning her face, descending to her neck and stopping briefly where her pulse beat rapidly. "And I am a man of my word. How much do I owe you?" "For the team, for the repair. I can make a transfer right now." Matteo laughed, a low sound that made the glass of the display case seem to vibrate. "Money?" He shook his head, as if the idea were offensive. "I don't need your money, little one. I have enough money to buy this entire block if I wanted to." Clara swallowed hard. His arrogance wasn't irritating, it was, disturbingly, exciting. "Then what do you want?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the display of sweets. His eyes examined the truffles, the tarts, until they stopped on a tray of dark chocolates with fleur de sel. "I want a taste," he said, turning his gaze back to her. "You said you were a confectioner. Prove that saving that oven was worth it." Clara blinked, confused and relieved. "You want a chocolate?" "I want the best you have. The one you make when you are in love or angry. The one that has the most soul." Clara hesitated for a second, then reached into the display case and picked a special truffle. 70% Belgian chocolate, filled with salted caramel and an infusion of chili pepper. It was intense, complex, and melted in the mouth. She placed the truffle on a small napkin and held it out to him. Matteo didn't take the napkin. He leaned over the counter, invading her personal space, and held Clara's wrist. His skin was warm, firm, and the touch sent an electric shock straight to her belly. He guided her hand to his mouth. Clara held her breath as he bit into the truffle, his lips lightly brushing her fingertips. The contact was brief, but intimate enough to make Clara's legs tremble. He chewed slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. She saw his pupils dilate. "Dio mio," he murmured, his voice getting thicker. "This is obscene." "It's an old recipe," Clara stammered, pulling her hand back, feeling her skin tingle where he had touched it. "Dark chocolate and chili. Sweet and dangerous. Like you." Matteo walked around the counter. Clara should have backed away, should have shouted that the area was restricted, but she stood paralyzed. He stopped inches from her. His scent enveloped her, an expensive mix of sandalwood, leather, and something citrusy, masculine and clean. He was immense close to her, emanating a heat that competed with the industrial oven. "Did the oven work well?" he asked, his voice now an intimate whisper, leaning down so his face was level with hers. "Yes," Clara replied, having to tilt her head back to face him. "It saved my skin." "Good. Because I don't like anything getting in the way of what I want." "And what do you want, Matteo?" The question came out bolder than she intended. He raised his hand and, with his thumb, gently wiped a smudge of flour from Clara's cheekbone. The touch was so delicate, so contrasting with the strength he emanated, that Clara closed her eyes for an instant. "I have a business dinner tomorrow night. At my house. Difficult people, demanding palates. I need a dessert that makes them shut up and smile." He slid his thumb to the corner of her mouth, tracing her lower lip. "I want you there." Clara opened her eyes. "You want to hire me for a dinner?" "I want you in my kitchen, Clara. I want to see you work. I want to smell this vanilla scent in my house." He moved even closer, to the point where she could feel his breath on her lips. "That is the payment. An exclusive night. You and your talents, at my disposal. That sounds..." She searched for the right word, her mind foggy from his proximity. "Indecent," he suggested, with an amused glint in his eyes. "Professional," she corrected, trying to regain control, although her heart was beating so hard she feared he could hear it. "I charge dearly for private events." "I already said price is not a problem." Matteo pulled away millimeter by millimeter, letting the cold air come between them, and Clara missed his warmth immediately. "I'll send a car to pick you up at 7 p.m. Don't be late." "I hate waiting." He turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped and looked over his shoulder. The setting sun hit his profile, highlighting the brutal elegance of his features. "And Clara?" "Yes. Wear something you don't mind getting dirty. The night is going to be long." With that, he left, letting the doorbell jingle and leaving Clara alone in the shop, holding the counter to keep from falling, with the phantom taste of danger and promise on her lips. She looked at the hand he had held. It still burned. She was about to enter the lion's den, and the most terrifying thing was that she could hardly wait. The mirror in the small bathroom above the confectionery reflected a woman Clara barely recognized. Her brown eyes were brighter, feverish with a potent mix of terror and an excitement that made her stomach feel full of butterflies flapping steel wings. It was 6:30 p.m. 30 minutes until Matteo's car arrived. She had spent the last few hours in a state of frenzy, sorting premium ingredients, organizing her best tools in a leather case, and, most difficult of all, deciding what to wear to cook in the house of a man who exuded danger and money. "Wear something you don't mind getting dirty." His phrase echoed in her mind. It sounded practical, but in his voice, it seemed like a promise that the night would be intense. She opted for her favorite work armor. Over a simple white camisole, she put on the apron she had designed herself. It was made of sturdy fabric with thin stripes in antique rose and white, but with delicate floral ruffles on the straps and hem, and a large beige pocket on the front where she kept her essential spatulas. It was the perfect blend of her personality, sweet, but ready for heavy work. Her curly brown hair was pulled up to the top of her head in a messy bun, with several loose strands purposely framing her face and long neck. To finish, she put on a pair of large silver hoop earrings and a delicate necklace with a circular pendant, touches of shine that said she wasn't just a hired cook, she was a woman going to meet a man. She touched up her lip gloss one last time, took a deep breath, grabbed her tool case, and went downstairs. Exactly at 7 p.m., a sleek black car, so long it seemed to take up 2 parking spaces on the narrow street, stopped in front of Dolce Vita. A driver in a suit got out and opened the back door for her in silence. The interior of the car smelled of new leather and sandalwood, the same scent Matteo carried. The ride was silent and fast. Clara watched the landscape change from the busy streets and old buildings of her neighborhood to wide, tree-lined avenues flanked by high walls that had mansions in one of the most exclusive areas of the city. The car stopped before a monumental wrought iron gate. A security guard waved from inside an armored booth, and the gate opened slowly, revealing a stone path leading to a house that looked more like a modern palace of glass and concrete. Clara's heart was in her throat. What was she getting herself into? The driver left her at the main door, which was made of solid wood and looked 3 meters high. Before she could ring the bell, the door opened. It wasn't a butler. It was him. Matteo was standing there, and the sight of him made Clara momentarily forget how to breathe. He looked different outside the confectionery environment, more in command of himself, if that was possible. He had swapped the suit for dark tailored trousers and a black linen shirt, with sleeves rolled up to his strong forearms, revealing an intricate tattoo on his left arm she hadn't seen before. His dark eyes swept her from top to bottom, lingering on the square neckline of the apron, the waist cinched by the striped sash, and moving up to the neck exposed by the high bun. His gaze was physical. She could feel it like a warm touch on her skin. "Punctual," he said, his voice husky with satisfaction. He took a step back, making room for her to enter. "Benvenuta, Clara." She entered. The entrance hall was immense, with a double-height ceiling and a marble staircase that seemed to float. The silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the sound of her low heels on the stone floor. "Your house is," she began, her voice echoing slightly. "Too big? Too empty?" He completed, closing the heavy door behind them, locking the world out. "Impressive," she corrected, turning to face him. He was dangerously close again. He raised a hand and lightly touched one of the large hoops in her ear, making the cold metal sway against the warm skin of her neck. "I like the look," he murmured, his eyes focused on her lips. "Sweet, but with a touch of defiance. Is the flowery apron to fool me, Piccola? To make me think you are harmless?" Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. She lifted her chin, refusing to retreat. "The apron is because I came to work, Matteo. Where is the kitchen?" His smile was slow and predatory. Straight to the point. "I like that." He gestured down a wide hallway. "Come. Let's see if you can handle the heat of my kitchen as well as you handled yours." Matteo's kitchen wasn't just a room, it was a culinary temple of brushed steel, black marble, and cutting-edge technology. The space was vast, lit by indirect lights that made the polished surfaces gleam. There was a gigantic central island, bigger than Clara's entire studio, equipped with an industrial stove that would make any chef weep with envy. But what made Clara nervous wasn't the luxury equipment. It was the owner. While she opened her leather case and laid out her tools, the whisk, the spatulas, the digital thermometer, Matteo didn't go to the living room to wait. He walked to a climate-controlled wine cellar built into the wall, took out a bottle of dark red wine, and poured 2 glasses. He walked to the island, placed a glass near where Clara was organizing ingredients, and then walked around the counter. Instead of sitting on one of the high stools, he leaned against the marble edge, crossing his strong arms over his chest, standing just 2 meters from her. "The kitchen is yours, Clara," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes fixed on every movement of her hands. "Impress me." Clara felt her hands sweat. "The guests," she began, her voice coming out a little strangled. "What time do they arrive? How many people are there? I need to calculate portions." Matteo took a slow sip of wine, his dark eyes gleaming over the crystal rim. "They arrive at 9 p.m. 4 people. Businessmen, Russians. They like vodka and don't appreciate sweets. Your job is to change their minds. Russians who don't like sweets." "Great," Clara murmured to herself, the professional challenge temporarily overcoming the sexual tension. "I'll make a tart tatin of pears with spices and cardamom, served with fresh whipped mascarpone cream. It's rustic, but sophisticated. The smell will get them before they even taste it." "Pears and spices," Matteo approved. "Warm and aromatic. Begin." Clara entered the zone. She held her breath and began. She peeled the pears with surgical precision, her hands moving with the agility of years of practice. The sound of the knife hitting the cutting board rhythmically echoed through the silent kitchen. While she worked, she could feel the weight of Matteo's gaze. He said nothing, just watched. He watched how her nimble fingers handled the fruit, how she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, how a few loose strands of hair brushed her nape. She put the sugar in the copper pan to make the caramel. This was the dangerous part. The sugar needed to melt until it reached the color of deep amber, on the threshold between sweet and burnt. The smell of toasted sugar began to fill the air, sweet and intense. "You cook with your whole body," Matteo commented suddenly, breaking the silence. Clara jumped slightly, the wooden spoon freezing in the air. "What?" Matteo uncrossed his arms and took a step toward her. "I've been watching you for 20 minutes. You don't just use your hands. You lean in, you dance with the pan, you frown. It is hypnotic." He was close now. Too close. The heat of his body radiated beside her, mixing with the heat of the stove. "The caramel requires attention, Matteo. If I blink, it burns." "Then don't blink," he whispered, stopping right behind her. Clara froze. He was so close his chest almost touched her back. She could feel his solid presence like a wall of heat. His scent of sandalwood invaded her nostrils, mixing intoxicatingly with the smell of caramelized sugar. He didn't touch her. Not yet. He just leaned in, his mouth close to her ear, watching the bubbling liquid in the pan in front of them. "It's getting dark," he murmured, his deep voice vibrating in her spine. "Is it the right color?" "Almost," Clara replied, her voice shaky. She needed to stir the caramel, but having Matteo behind her, surrounding her without touching her, was destroying her motor coordination. A few more seconds. "You are trembling, Piccola. You are in my workspace." "I own the space," he retorted, amused. Then, he raised his hand. Clara thought he was going to touch her, but he reached for the counter and grabbed a glass jar with cinnamon sticks she had set aside. "May I?" he asked. "Put 1 stick." "Only 1." Matteo reached his arm over her shoulder, the fabric of his linen shirt brushing against the bare skin of her arm, and dropped the cinnamon into the boiling caramel. The aroma exploded in the air, spicy and sweet. He didn't move away. Instead, he rested his hands on the edge of the stove, one on each side of Clara's hips, effectively caging her between his body and the fire. Clara's heart beat so hard she feared falling into the pan. Mateo, she warned, or maybe begged, she wasn't sure. The caramel is ready, Clara. Take it off the heat. With trembling hands, she turned off the flame and moved the pan. Silence returned, but now it was charged with tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. He turned his face, his nose brushing against her hair, inhaling deeply near her neck. Vanilla, he said. You smell like vanilla and fear. A dangerous combination for a man like me. Clara turned within the limited space of his arms, facing him, but pressed against the counter. She had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. They were dark, dilated, hungry. I am not afraid of you, she lied, lifting her chin. Mateo smiled, and that smile made her knees give way. Liar. Your heart is beating so fast I can see the pulse here. He raised his hand and traced the vein in her neck with his thumb, a touch light as a feather, but which burned like fire. And here. His hand went down, tracing the line of the square neckline of the flowery apron, stopping dangerously close to the curve of her breast. Clara gasped. The guests. She tried to remember, her voice failing. Damn the guests, Mateo growled softly. They can wait. But I am not known for my patience. He lowered his head slowly, giving her all the time in the world to push him away, to run. But Clara didn't move. She was trapped in his gravitational field. When his lips touched hers, it wasn't gentle. It was a claim. He kissed her with the taste of wine and dark promises, one hand going up to hold the back of her neck, holding her firm while he deepened the kiss, stealing her breath and her sanity in the middle of that spotless kitchen. It was a kiss that tasted of burnt caramel and danger, and Clara, for the first time in her life, didn't want anything sweet. She wanted the fire. The kiss was broken not by lack of desire, but by the sharp, insistent sound of the intercom on the kitchen wall. Mateo let out a low growl, vibrating against Clara's mouth, but didn't pull away immediately. He lightly bit her lower lip, a gesture of possession before retreating millimeters. His eyes were black, pupils dilated, swallowing the iris. The caramel, Clara panted, her voice unrecognizable, her fingers still clutching his linen shirt. If we wait another minute, it will crystallize. Let it crystallize, Mateo murmured, his voice husky. I'll buy another kitchen. I'll buy the whole of France if necessary not to stop this now. Clara laughed, a nervous, breathless sound. You can't buy chemistry, Mateo. If the sugar burns, the tart becomes bitter. And you promised demanding guests. With a sigh of frustration that seemed to physically hurt, Mateo pulled away, running a hand through his dark hair. The intercom rang again. He walked to the panel on the wall and pressed the button with unnecessary force. Parla. Sir, Mr. Volkov and his entourage are at the gate, the security guard's voice sounded metallic. Mateo looked at Clara. The mask of seduction fell instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating, impenetrable expression. The change was so abrupt Clara felt a chill. The lover had vanished, the boss was there. Send them in. Take them to the dining room. Serve the beluga vodka. I'll be down in 5 minutes. He hung up and turned to her. You have 40 minutes until dessert, he said. The tone was professional, but his eyes still burned where they touched her skin. Stay here. Do not leave the kitchen until I call you. These men, they aren't like the customers at your confectionery. Are they dangerous? Clara asked, turning her attention back to the pears, trying to steady her shaking hands. They are sharks, Clara. But in this house, the only monster is me. Just stay out of sight until it's time to serve. He left without touching her again, leaving a vacuum of cold air where there was once heat. Clara channeled all her sexual frustration and fear into the tart tatin. She arranged the pears over the caramel with manic precision, covered everything with the puff pastry she had brought ready-made, and pushed the iron skillet into the oven. While the tart baked, the smell began to change. The sweet, buttery aroma of pears cooking in caramel and spices filled the cold, modern kitchen, suddenly making it welcoming. It was a smell of home, of comfort, of safe memories. 40 minutes later, the tart came out of the oven, golden, bubbling, and perfect. Clara flipped it onto the serving plate with a quick, confident movement. The caramel ran down the sides of the soft pears, shiny as molten glass. The kitchen door opened. A huge man, wearing a suit that seemed too tight for his muscles, entered. He had a scar on his chin and didn't smile. Mr. Moretti requested dessert. Clara nodded, placed the serving plate on a silver tray, along with the bowl of whipped mascarpone cream, and followed the giant. The dining room was a cavernous environment, with walls lined in dark wood and a table long enough to seat 20 people. Only 5 seats were occupied. Smoke from expensive cigars hung in the air like a bluish mist, mixing with the strong smell of alcohol. Conversation stopped as soon as she entered. 4 pairs of eyes turned to her. They were heavy, assessing looks that made her want to shrink. But then, she looked at the head of the table. Matteo was there. He held a crystal glass with a clear liquid, leaning back in his chair with the posture of a bored king. When he saw her, his eyes softened imperceptibly. He made a subtle gesture with his hand. "Come." Clara walked to the table, the heels of her shoes making a rhythmic sound on the wooden floor. She placed the tart in the center. The aroma of cinnamon, butter, and toasted sugar cut through the cigar smoke like a sweet blade. "What is this?" asked a gray-haired, red-faced man sitting to Matteo's right. His accent was heavy, slurred. "We asked for meat, Moretti. Not fruit." "It is tart tatin," Matteo replied, his voice calm, but with a thread of steel. "Made exclusively for this night by the best confectioner in the city. Taste it, Volkov. Consider it a gesture of goodwill before we sign the contract." Clara served a slice to the man named Volkov, placing a generous spoonful of the white cream on the side. The contrast of hot and cold, sweet and tart. The Russian looked at the plate with disdain, picked up the spoon, and brought it to his mouth. The room went silent. Clara held her breath, hands clasped over her flowery apron, feeling vulnerable in her armor of ruffles. Volkov chewed. His expression changed. The scowl undid itself, his shoulders relaxed. He closed his eyes for a second and let out a sigh that had nothing to do with business. "Bliat," he murmured. "It reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen in St. Petersburg. Apples in autumn." He opened his eyes and looked at Clara, now with a reluctant respect. "You have golden hands, girl." Matteo smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just seen his trap work. "I said she was the best," Matteo spoke, raising his glass toward Clara. "Thank you, Clara. You may withdraw." It was a dismissal, but the way he said her name made it feel like a secret invitation. Clara returned to the kitchen, legs trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted. She began washing dishes compulsively, just to have something to do with her hands. 10 minutes later, she heard voices in the hall, farewells in Russian, the sound of the heavy door closing. And then, silence. Rapid, firm footsteps approached the kitchen. The door opened and Matteo entered. He had already taken off his jacket and loosened his imaginary tie, unbuttoning one more button of his shirt. He looked electric. "They signed," he said, pushing the door shut and locking it. "They liked the tart," Clara replied, drying her hands on her apron. "They ate the whole tart." Volkov was crying at the end, talking about his childhood. Mateo laughed, shaking his head, and walked up to her. You disarmed a man who killed 3 people last week with sugar and cinnamon. He stopped in front of her, took Clara's damp hands, and brought them to his lips. You are a dangerous weapon, Clara. I just did my job. And now. Mateo pulled her against his body, not caring about the flour or water. Now it's my turn to taste. He lifted her effortlessly, sitting her on the cold marble island. Clara gasped as she was eye level with him. The contract is signed, the Russians are gone, he whispered against her mouth. The kitchen is ours again. And I still have the taste of that interrupted kiss in my mouth. The tart is finished, Mateo, she teased, wrapping her legs around his waist instinctively. I don't want the tart, he growled, his hands sliding up her thighs, pushing up the fabric of the dress and apron. I want the confectioner. And when he kissed her this time, there was no intercom, no Russians, no world outside to save her. There was only Mateo, the taste of victory and desire, and the certainty that Clara would never settle for a lukewarm life again. The kitchen, previously a stage for culinary tension and dangerous negotiations, now seemed to have shrunk to the size of the space between their bodies. Mateo didn't take her immediately to bed. He had the control of a monarch, even when desire darkened his eyes. He held Clara's face between his hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with a reverence that contrasted with the brute force he had exuded before the Russians. Are you sure, Clara? He asked, his voice husky, brushing against her lips. I am not the type of man who plays house. If you go up those stairs with me, tomorrow morning you will no longer be just the confectioner who dialed the wrong number. You will be mine. And the world will know it. Clara looked at him. The fear was there, yes. He was a man who dined with assassins and spoke of $1-million contracts as if it were the weather forecast. But he was also the man who had ordered a team to save her oven in the middle of the night, who looked at her as if she were the most exquisite dessert he had ever seen. She brought her hands to his wrists, feeling the strong beat of his heart under his skin. I don't want to go back to safety, Mateo, she whispered. I want to see what is in the dark. Mateo let out a sound that was half groan, half approval. He pulled her off the marble island but didn't put her on the floor. He wrapped her in his arms, carrying her as if she weighed nothing, ignoring the fact that she was still wearing the apron dirty with flour and sugar. They climbed the floating staircase. Clara buried her face in his neck, inhaling that addictive scent of sandalwood and warm skin. Mateo's bedroom was vast, decorated in shades of charcoal gray and midnight blue. An entire wall was glass, revealing the twinkling lights of the city below, a kingdom of lights he seemed to rule from up there. In the center, a king-size bed with black silk sheets looked like an invitation to sin. He set her on the floor beside the bed but didn't let her go. With torturous slowness, he brought his hands to her back and undid the apron bow. This armor, he murmured, letting the flowery fabric slide down her body to the floor, served its purpose well. But now I want to see the woman beneath the confectioner. He undressed Clara not with haste, but with meticulous adoration, as if he were unwrapping a rare gift. Every inch of exposed skin was greeted with a warm touch, a kiss, or a look that made her feel like she was burning. When her skin finally met the cold silk sheets, and Mateo's weight and heat covered her, Clara forgot the names of every cake she had ever baked. The night wasn't just sex. It was a discovery. Mateo loved her with a focused intensity, discovering every sensitive spot, every sigh, every reaction. He was demanding, yes, guiding her with that natural authority, but he was also incredibly generous. You are sweet, he whispered in her ear, his voice broken, as their bodies moved in an ancient, perfect rhythm. Dio, you are so sweet it hurts. For Clara, it was like being consumed by a storm. There was no fear, only the overwhelming sensation of belonging to that moment, to that man. Hours later, the silent dawn covered the room. Clara woke up feeling a heavy, possessive arm over her waist. Mateo was sleeping, his face buried in the curve of her neck, his regular breathing warming her skin. She lay motionless for a moment, absorbing the reality. She was in Mateo Moretti's bed. She had just made love to one of the most dangerous men in the city. And, for the first time in years, she wasn't worried about rent, the oven, or loneliness. She tried to move slowly so as not to wake him, but his arm tightened instantly. "Don't you dare run away," his voice sounded husky with sleep, but alert. He opened one eye, the dark brown fixed on her. "I wasn't going to run away," Clara lied, smiling shyly. "I was just going to get water." Mateo propped himself up on one elbow, the sheet slipping down to reveal his broad, defined chest. He looked like a relaxed Roman god. He stretched his arm to the bedside table, grabbed a crystal water bottle, and poured a glass for her. While she drank, he brushed a lock of hair away from her face. "Volkov called me 10 minutes ago," he said casually. Clara almost choked. He called at 4 a.m.? Russians don't sleep. And apparently neither do mobsters in love with pear tarts. Mateo smiled crookedly. He doubled the order. "Wants my company to manage all his transport logistics at the port." But he imposed a condition. Clara's heart stopped. "What condition?" "That I bring the lady with the golden hands to St. Petersburg next month for his wife's birthday. He said he'll pay whatever you want." Clara blinked, stunned. "St. Petersburg? I have a shop to run, Mateo. I can't just—" "We'll solve that," he interrupted her, his voice firm. "But that made me think of something else." He took the glass from her hand and placed it on the table. Then, he held both her hands in his. "What you saw today, the tension, the armed men, the power play. That is my life, Clara. It isn't pretty, it isn't clean like your confectionery. But I try to keep the dirt outside the walls. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to know where you are stepping. I am not a good man, Clara. I did things, necessary things to maintain order, to protect what is mine. You protected my oven," she said softly. "You protected me from the Russians. And I will protect you from everything that comes," he promised, the intensity in his eyes almost frightening. "But in return, I need something." Clara felt her heart accelerate. "The collection." "What?" "I need you to be my refuge," he said, and the vulnerability in his voice disarmed her completely. "When the world outside is nothing but steel and blood, I need to come home and find this. The smell of vanilla. The warmth. You." He kissed the palm of her hand, right where a small sugar burn scar marked her skin. "Do you accept this contract, Piccola? No lawyers, no signatures. Just us." Clara looked at him. At the thin scar on his eyebrow, at the strength of his shoulders, at the loneliness she glimpsed deep in those dark eyes. She knew it would be dangerous. She knew it would be complicated. But she also knew that without him, her life would be just a succession of flavorless cakes. She leaned in and kissed his lips, softly at first, then firmly. "As long as you promise never to let my oven break again," she whispered against his mouth. Mateo laughed, a sound of pure relief, and pulled her back under the sheets. "Consider it done. Now, come here. I think I still need one more taste of that dessert." And as the sun began to paint the Sao Paulo sky in orange and pink, Clara realized she had just made the highest bet of her life. And she was winning. The reality of Dolce Vita the next morning seemed to have changed color. The exposed brick walls, previously charming and rustic, now seemed too fragile to contain the storm of emotions Clara carried in her chest. She had arrived 2 hours ago, brought by Mateo's discreet driver. Her body still hummed with the electricity of the night before, every muscle held the memory of his touch, and the scent of sandalwood seemed to have impregnated her skin, resisting even the strong aroma of coffee and chocolate that now filled the shop. She was trying to glaze a batch of eclairs, but her hands, usually steady as rocks, were trembling slightly. Her mind wasn't on the choux pastry, it was on the image of Matteo sleeping, the weight of his arm, the dangerous promise of being his refuge. The doorbell rang, shrill and annoying. It wasn't the deep ring that announced Matteo. Clara looked up inside. It was Mr. Barreto, the owner of the building. A short, balding, perpetually sweaty man who seemed to take sadistic pleasure in showing up on days when rent was due. "Late, Donna Clara." Again, he grumbled, entering without greeting and wiping his forehead with a dingy handkerchief. "It's already the 15th. The agreement was the 10th. Clara put down the piping bag and wiped her hands on her apron. The fantasy bubble of the previous night burst. "Good morning, Mr. Barreto. I had a problem with the oven, that delayed the orders." She tried to argue, keeping her voice calm. "But I got a big job yesterday. The money hits the account tomorrow. I'll pay with interest. Tomorrow. He slapped his hand on the glass counter, making the trays vibrate. "I am tired of promises, girl. I have an offer from a pharmacy to rent this spot. They pay double. If the money isn't in my hand today by noon, you are out." Street. Panic, that old acquaintance, tried to rise in Clara's throat. "You can't do that. My contract." "Your contract is worth as much as this parchment paper if you don't pay," he shouted, his face turning red. "Noon. Or I call the police to drag you out of here for trespassing." Clara opened her mouth to reply, to beg for one more day, but the words died on her tongue. The doorbell rang again. This time, the sound was different. The atmosphere in the small shop changed instantly, as if the air pressure had dropped before a storm. Mr. Barreto stopped shouting and turned around. Matteo was standing in the doorway. He looked like a dark deity against the morning light coming from the street. He wore an impeccable gray suit, perfectly cut, with sunglasses that he slowly removed, revealing eyes that promised nothing but destruction. He didn't look at Clara immediately. His focus was entirely on the small sweaty man who dared raise his voice in his territory. "I think I heard the word police," Matteo said. His voice was low, smooth, but carried that steel vibration Clara knew so well. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Barreto, who had lived in the neighborhood long enough to recognize the type of suit and, mainly, the type of man Matteo was, paled visibly. It is a private matter, sir," Barreto stammered, taking a step back. "The tenant is late on rent. I was just collecting." Matteo walked into the shop. He moved with lethal elegance, ignoring Barreto and walking to the counter. He rested his hands on the wood, exactly as he had done the day before, and finally looked at Clara. "Was he shouting at you, Piccola?" Matteo asked. His eyes swept her face, looking for signs of fear. "It's just the rent, Matteo," Clara whispered, feeling her face burn. She didn't want him to see her like this, vulnerable, owing money. "I was going to fix it." "I know you were," he agreed softly. Then, he turned slowly to Mr. Barreto. The change in his face was terrifying. The softness vanished. "What is your name?" "B. Barreto." "Alberto Barreto." "Mr. Barreto." Matteo took a matte black card from his inner jacket pocket, along with a fountain pen. "The pharmacy you mentioned. How much did they offer for the spot?" "What?" Well, it was a figure of speech, The amount, Matteo cut in, his voice dry like a whip. 8,000 a month, Barreto lied, trembling. Mateo didn't even blink. He pulled a checkbook from his pocket, something old-fashioned, but in his hands it looked like a weapon, and wrote quickly. He tore out the page and held it out to the man, holding it with only 2 fingers. "Here it is." Barreto took the check and his eyes almost popped out of his sockets. This is. "That is the value of the building," Mateo said, bored. "Including the shop, the apartments above, and the lot in the back. The value is 30% above market. It is a generous offer. The only offer you will receive." Clara gasped. "Mateo. You can't." He raised a hand to silence her, without looking away from the man. "You are going to take that check, go to the notary right now, where my lawyer is already waiting with the transfer paperwork, and you are going to sign everything. Then, you will disappear. If I hear your voice, or know that you stepped on the sidewalk again." Mateo tilted his head slightly, a cruel smile curving his lips. "Let's say the police will be the least of your problems. Did I make myself clear?" "Crystal, sir. Perfectly clear." Barreto pocketed the check as if it were gold, and it was, muttered an incoherent apology to Clara, and left the shop almost running, tripping over his own feet. Silence returned to Dolce Vita. Clara stood looking at the empty door, then at Mateo. Shock rendered her speechless. "You bought the building," she said finally. It wasn't a question. Mateo put away the pen and turned his attention back to her. The coldness disappeared, replaced by that possessive warmth that made her knees weak. "I don't like noisy neighbors. And I detest, absolutely detest, another man thinking he has the right to shout at you. Mateo, this is madness. I can't accept this. I am not a call girl you support." He walked around the counter. This time, Clara didn't back away. He stopped in front of her, invading her space, and held her by the waist, pulling her against his firm body. "You are not a call girl, Clara. You are my woman." The declaration was made with brutal simplicity. "And what is mine, I protect. Besides." He leaned in, brushing his nose against her neck, making her shiver. "Now I am your landlord. I think we need to negotiate the terms of your lease." Clara tried to maintain her indignation, but her body betrayed her. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the expensive fabric of the suit. "And how does the sir intend to collect?" Mateo nibbled her earlobe, sending waves of heat straight to her belly. "Rent will be paid in kind. Exclusively in sweets. And dinners. And perhaps." He moved his hand down, squeezing the curve of her waist possessively, "some overtime hours in my office." "You are impossible," she sighed, surrendering and wrapping her arms around his neck. "I am practical," he corrected, pulling away enough to look into her eyes. His expression became serious for a moment. "Pack your bags, Clara. We go to Russia on Tuesday. But passport, visa. All handled. My team will bring the documents this afternoon." He kissed the tip of her nose. "Close the shop early today. I'll send the car at 7 p.m. To your house." "No. Today we dine out. I want to show you off. I want everyone to see who owns Dolce Vita and..." He gave her a long, possessive peck. "Who owns her?" He stepped away, adjusted his jacket, and walked to the exit. Before opening the door, he looked back, winking. "And Clara?" "The eclair is crooked." He left, leaving her alone in the middle of her kitchen, which now, technically, belonged to him. But while Clara looked at the imperfect pastry on the counter, she didn't feel bought or controlled. She felt, in an overwhelming and frightening way, loved. And that was much more dangerous. It was 6 p.m. when a courier rang the bell at Dolce Vita. It wasn't Mr. Barretto, nor a customer. It was a young, uniformed man holding a black rectangular box with a silver satin ribbon. For Miss Clara. From Mr. Moretti. Clara took the box, feeling the weight of the textured cardboard. She locked the shop early, as ordered, a strange, guilty feeling of freedom, and went up to the small apartment above the confectionery. Upon opening the box on her narrow bed, her breath escaped her. It wasn't just a dress. It was a statement. The fabric was silk velvet, in a deep emerald green shade that seemed to capture the light and swallow it. The cut was bold, thin straps, a deep V neckline, and a side slit that rose dangerously up her thigh. Attached to the dress was a handwritten note in his strong, angular handwriting. Green suits your eyes when you are defiant. Wear it. M. There was also a smaller box. Inside, a pair of emerald and diamond earrings that probably cost more than her shop's entire stock. Clara touched the cold stones, feeling a mix of bedazzlement and panic. He wasn't joking when he said he wanted to show her off. An hour later, she looked in the mirror. The reflected woman looked like a noir film star. The velvet hugged every curve of her body like a second skin, the green enhancing the honey tone of her skin. She left her hair down, waves falling over her bare shoulders, and painted her lips a dark red, almost wine. She was no longer just the confectioner struggling to pay bills. Matteo was transforming her into a queen of the underworld, and the reflection didn't look scared. It looked powerful. The restaurant chosen by Matteo was on the penthouse of one of the most exclusive skyscrapers on Avenida Paulista. Cielo was the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance and where the elite of Sao Paulo went to see and be seen. When Clara arrived, guided by the driver, the maitre d' at the entrance didn't even ask for her name. Miss Clara. Mr. Moretti awaits you at the main table. He guided her through the dimly lit room, decorated with crystals and white orchids. Clara felt the stares. Men paused their conversations to follow her with their eyes. Women assessed her with that critical mix of envy and curiosity. The green dress was a beacon in the elegant darkness of the place. And there he was. Matteo stood up when she approached. If he was impressive in the morning, at night he was devastating. The tailored black tuxedo made him even broader, more imposing. But it was the expression on his face that made Clara's heart skip a beat. He didn't smile. He looked at her with a naked, raw, possessive hunger. His eyes swept her body, lingering on the slit of the dress, on the neckline, before meeting her eyes. Dios santo. He whispered when she got close enough for only him to hear. Do you want to cause a murder in this restaurant, Clara? Because that is how the men are looking at you. And I am tempted to gouge out the eyes of every single one of them. You said you wanted to show me off, she reminded him, her voice a little shaky from his intensity. Complaints now, Mr. Moretti? No complaints. Just precautions. He took her hand and kissed it, not on the back of the hand like a gentleman, but on the palm, an intimate and erotic gesture. Then, he pulled out the chair for her to sit. Dinner was a dance of seduction. Matteo ordered the wine, the food, taking control of everything. They talked about Russia, about the confectionery, about her dreams that had gathered dust from hard work. Matteo listened with absolute attention, making her feel like the most important person in the world. And you? Clara asked, after tasting a divine saffron risotto. What is your dream, Matteo? Besides buying buildings to silence annoying landlords? Matteo swirled his wine glass, the red liquid staining the crystal. Peace, he said, and the words sounded heavy. A kind of peace I never had. The ability to stop looking over my shoulder. And he looked at her, his eyes softening, finding someone who isn't afraid of my shadow. I am here, aren't I? You are. And that is what terrifies and fascinates me. At that moment, a shadow fell over the table. Mateo. A female voice, shrill and laden with false sweetness, cut through the intimate mood. Clara looked up. A tall blonde woman, dressed in a silver model that screamed haute couture, stood by the table. She was beautiful, in a cold and manufactured way. Mateo didn't stand up. His expression hardened instantly. Bianca. I haven't seen you in the circles for months, she said, ignoring Clara completely and placing a manicured hand on Mateo's shoulder. Heard about the business with the Russians. Always ambitious. I am busy, Bianca. She laughed, a dry sound, and finally deigned to look at Clara. The look went up and down, full of disdain. Ah, I see you brought company. One of your new protégés? I don't recognize the face. Is she a model? Or... She paused cruelly, something one pays by the hour? The silence at the table was deafening. Clara felt her face burn with humiliation and anger. She opened her mouth to reply, but she didn't need to. Mateo stood up slowly. He removed Bianca's hand from his shoulder as if it were a dirty insect. The aura of danger emanating from him made the temperature around the table drop 10 degrees. Apologize, Mateo said. His voice was low, calm, but the threat in it was so palpable that Bianca took a step back, her smile faltering. What? Mateo, don't be ridiculous, I was just... You just insulted my woman, he interrupted her, his voice cutting like glass. This is Clara. She is not a model, nor anything your small mind can conceive. She is the owner of her own empire, and the only reason I haven't had you thrown out of this restaurant for disturbance yet is that I don't want to ruin her night. Bianca paled, looking from Mateo to Clara, realizing the fatal mistake she had made. I'm sorry. I didn't know it was serious. Now you know. Get lost. Bianca muttered something inaudible and hurried away, disappearing into the room. Mateo sat down again, adjusting his napkin as if nothing had happened, but his jaw was still tense. He looked at Clara, and the fury in his eyes turned into concern. Are you okay? Clara was trembling, but not from fear. From admiration. No one had ever defended her like that. Never. My woman, she repeated his words, a shy smile appearing on her lips. Is that an official title now? Mateo reached across the table, interlacing his fingers with hers. The grip was firm, warm, safe. Since the moment you gave me that chili truffle, Clara. I was just waiting for you to realize it. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, one by one, without taking his eyes off hers. Let's leave, he said huskily. I want to take this stress off you. I want to make you forget the name of anyone else who isn't me. And dessert? Clara teased, although her body was already reacting to the promise in his eyes. Mateo smiled, that wolfish smile that had made her fall in love. The dessert is me, Piccola. And I promise I will be much sweeter than this risotto. They left the restaurant hand in hand, leaving curious glances and other people's envy behind. In the private elevator going down to the garage, Mateo didn't wait. He pressed her against the mirrored wall and kissed her with a desperate urgency, as if he needed to prove, right there, that she was his and no one else's. And Clara, wrapped in velvet, emeralds, and in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, knew there was no place in the world she would rather be. Russia awaited her, but the real adventure had already begun. Tuesday arrived wrapped in a fine mist, but for Clara, everything seemed to have a surreal sharpness. She stood in the middle of a private hangar at Guarulhos Airport. The wind whipped the hem of her wool coat, a new piece, bought on Mateo's orders for the Russian cold, but she felt no cold. She felt his presence beside her, solid as a wall. Before them, a matte black executive jet, elegant and intimidating like its owner, waited with the stairs down. There were no lines, no intrusive security checks, no chaos. Just the silence of power. "You are trembling," Matteo murmured, putting his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. The heat of his body penetrated through her layers of clothing. "Fear of flying?" "Fear of falling," Clara confessed, looking at the aircraft. "And I'm not talking about the plane." Matteo stopped and turned her to face him. The wind messed up his dark hair, giving him a wild appearance that contrasted with the sophistication of the environment. "I would never let you fall, Clara." He held her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. "And if we fall together. But I prefer to fly. Shall we?" He guided her inside. The interior of the jet didn't look like a plane, it looked like a floating living room of a five-star hotel. Cream leather armchairs, soft carpet where feet sank in, dark wood and gold details. There was a soft smell of fresh coffee and flowers, white orchids, the same as the restaurant, arranged in a vase on a side table. As soon as the door was closed and pressurized, isolating them from the world, Matteo visibly relaxed. He took off his jacket, tossing it onto an armchair, and loosened his tie. "Champagne?" he offered, going to a built-in bar. "At 10 a.m.? We are on international time now. Normal rules don't apply." He poured 2 crystal glasses and held one out to her. "A toast." "To what?" Clara asked, accepting the glass. "To St. Petersburg. And to the woman who had the courage to board this plane with me." They toasted. The golden liquid went down bubbly and cold. The plane began to taxi, and in minutes, they were in the air, leaving Brazil and Clara's old life behind, below the clouds. When they reached cruising altitude, Matteo took her hand and guided her to the back of the plane. He opened a sliding wooden door, revealing a private bedroom. There was a real double bed, covered with duvets that looked like clouds, and oval windows showing the infinite blue of the sky. "Matteo," Clara whispered, impressed. "The trip is long, Piccola. 17 hours with stops. I don't intend to spend that time sitting in an armchair." He locked the door behind them. The sound of the engines was just a distant hum inside. They were in a private bubble, suspended between the sky and earth. Matteo walked to her, took the glass from her hand and placed it on a bedside table. Then, he began to unbutton her coat. "Outside, in Russia, it will be cold," he said, his voice low and husky. "Freezing. Hostile. But here." He slid the coat down her arms, letting it fall to the floor. His hands moved up her waist, warm and possessive, pulling her until there was no space between them. "Here, I want you to burn. We have to talk about Volkov, about the event." Clara tried to be rational, but her mind was getting foggy with his proximity. Later, Matteo cut in, kissing the curve of her neck, right on the spot where her pulse beat frantically. "Now, I just want to know if you are as sweet at 40,000 feet as you are on the ground." He kissed her, and gravity seemed to disappear. Making love to Matteo in the sky was different. There was no desperate urgency of the office or the novelty of the first time. There was a deep intimacy, a slow and deliberate exploration. He worshipped her with his body, with his hands, with his mouth, making her feel like the only woman in the universe. They lay in bed afterward, wrapped in the sheets, watching the clouds pass by the window. Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to the calm beat of Matteo's heart. "Why me?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "You can have any woman. Models, actresses, daughters of oligarchs. Why the confectioner who dialed the wrong number?" Matteo caressed her arm, drawing invisible patterns on her skin. "Because they see the money, Clara. Or the power. or the danger. They look at me and see Moretti, the legend, the monster, the boss. He turned his face to kiss the top of her head. The first time you spoke to me, you were worried about your oven. You had passion in your voice. You were fighting for something you loved. And when you saw me, you didn't back down. You offered me a sweet and challenged me. He tightened his arm around her. I don't need a woman who fears me or blindly adores me. I need a partner. Someone who brings sweetness to my world of steel, but who has enough fire not to melt when things heat up. I have fire, Clara agreed, smiling against his skin. I know you do. I felt it. Hours later, the pilot announced the start of descent. The landscape outside changed. The blue gave way to a metallic gray and, below them, the earth was a white carpet of endless snow. Matteo dressed with military efficiency, returning to being the ruthless businessman. He helped Clara put on her coat, buttoning it up to the neck with paternal care. Put on the gloves, he ordered, handing her a pair of lined leather ones. Do not take them off for anything outside. The wind out there cuts like a razor. When the jet door opened in St. Petersburg, the freezing air invaded the cabin, shocking and brutal. Clara gasped, seeing her breath turn into a white cloud instantly. But before the cold could penetrate her bones, Matteo was there. He wrapped her waist with a strong arm, using his own body as a shield against the wind. Welcome to Russia, Clara, he said in her ear, as they descended the stairs toward a fleet of black armored cars waiting on the snow-covered runway. Stay close to me. Always, she replied, squeezing his hand. As they entered the heated car, Clara looked at the city of golden domes and shining snow in the distance. It was a new, dangerous, and unknown world. But she looked to the side, at Matteo's strong profile, and smiled. She had brought her own fire. St. Petersburg wasn't just a city, it was the setting of a frozen and dangerous fairy tale. Snow fell thick and silent outside the hotel windows, covering the golden domes of the cathedrals and the Neva River in an immaculate white mantle. But inside the presidential suite, the climate was tropical. Clara stood before a full-length mirror with a gold frame, trying to control her breathing. The night of the event had arrived. The birthday of Katerina Volkov, the wife of the most feared man in Russia. You are overthinking, Matteo's voice came from the bedroom door. Clara saw him in the reflection. He was already dressed to kill. A black velvet tuxedo, impeccable white shirt, and a bow tie he had left undone, hanging around his neck, giving him an air of casual and sinful elegance. He walked up to her, the sound of his shoes muffled by the Persian rugs. It's not every day I cook for the Russian Mafia, Matteo, she said, smoothing the fabric of the dress he had chosen for the final part of the night. It was a blood-red silk gown, with a bare back and long sleeves, dramatic and imperial. What if they don't like it? Volkov said his wife is difficult. Matteo stopped behind her, his hands resting possessively on Clara's bare shoulders, her skin prickling with the warm contact. Katerina is demanding, he agreed, his dark eyes fixed on the reflection of her eyes. But she respects strength. And your cooking has strength, Clara. You aren't going there to ask for approval. You are going there to conquer. As you did with me. He leaned in and kissed the curve of her neck, a slow, wet touch that made Clara's knees tremble under the silk. Besides, he whispered against her skin, if anyone dares criticize your suite, I'll buy Russia and have the country closed. Clara laughed, the tension dissipating a little. Let's go. The driver is waiting. And I have a kitchen to command. The Volkov estate was on the outskirts of the city, a dacha that looked more like a czarist palace. High walls, guards armed with rifles patrolling the snow, and luxury cars arriving in a procession of lights and wealth. Clara was taken directly to the service entrance, but Matteo didn't let her go alone. He accompanied her through the cold stone corridors to the underground kitchens. The place was organized chaos. Dozens of chefs were shouting in Russian, pots banging, steam rising from huge cauldrons. When Clara entered, wearing her custom white chef's coat, which she had changed into in the locker room, saving the red dress for later, silence fell. The head chef of the house, a portly man named Yuri, looked at her with disdain. "This is the specialist?" he asked in broken English, looking at Matteo. Matteo didn't raise his voice. He just took a step forward, placing himself beside Clara, radiating that aura of absolute power. "This is Mrs. Clara. And tonight, this kitchen is hers. Anything she asks for, you will do. If she needs honey from the Caucasus Mountains in 5 minutes, you will fetch it. Am I clear?" Yuri swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Yes, Mr. Moretti." Matteo turned to Clara, ignoring the audience of terrified cooks. He held her face with both hands. "I will be in the main hall, dealing with the wolves. You deal with the sugar." He kissed her, a deep and hungry kiss in front of everyone, marking territory, making it clear to every man there that she was untouchable. "See you in victory." When he left, Clara took a deep breath. She looked at Yuri and the team. "Very well," she said, her voice firm. "Let's begin. I need vanilla beans, edible gold, and the best vodka you have hidden. Now." The next 4 hours were a battle. Clara worked at a frenetic pace. She was creating a retelling of the classic Medovik, the Russian honey cake, but with her signature, wafer-thin layers of spice cake interspersed with a mascarpone and Sicilian lemon cream, covered by a white chocolate ganache and honey caviar. It was risky. It was too Italian for a purist, too Russian for a foreigner. It was perfect. When it was time to serve, Clara changed the chef's coat for the red dress. She let her hair down, touched up her lipstick, and accompanied the waiters pushing the silver carts to the ballroom. The hall was dazzling. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, gold-lined walls, live classical music. Hundreds of guests chatted in Russian, clinking jewelry and glasses. At the main table, on a raised platform, sat Volkov and a blonde, icy, and beautiful woman, Katerina. Matteo was seated to Volkov's right, looking bored with the conversation until he saw Clara enter. He stopped. The glass of vodka hung suspended in the air. The look he cast her across the crowded room was so intense Clara felt as if he had physically touched her. He devoured her with his eyes, pride and desire mixed in a silent promise. Clara approached the main table. Silence spread as the waiters placed the dessert plates before the guests of honor. Katerina looked at the plate. It was an architectural work of art, dusted with gold. "Medovik?" she asked, raising a perfectly drawn eyebrow. "A bit banal, don't you think?" Clara's heart stopped. "Taste it, Mrs. Volkov," Clara said, her voice echoing slightly. "Please." Katerina picked up the silver fork. Volkov watched, tense. Matteo was relaxed, twisting the ring on his finger, blindly trusting her. The woman brought the piece to her mouth. The cream melted. The honey exploded. The lemon cut through the sweetness. Katerina's eyes widened. The ice mask cracked. A genuine, almost childlike smile lit up her face. "Oh," she sighed. "This isn't a cake. This is poetry." Volkov let out a thunderous laugh, slapping the table and making the crystals shake. "She liked it. Moretti, you son of a bitch, she liked it." Matteo raised his glass to Clara, a corner smile on his lips. "I never doubted." Katerina turned to Clara. "How did you do this?" "The honey tastes like sunshine." "It's a secret, ma'am," Clara replied, smiling. "But let's say it was made with heat." The tension in the room evaporated, replaced by celebration. Volkov stood up and insisted on a toast to the magic confectioner from Brazil. But Clara barely heard the praise. She only had eyes for Mateo. He stood up, excused himself from the hosts, and walked over to her. He didn't care about the hundreds of stares. He took her hand and pulled her away from the main table, towards a side balcony whose glass doors opened to the snow-covered garden. As soon as the doors closed, muffling the music and voices, he pressed her against the cold glass. Snow fell outside, but the fire between them was unbearable. "You were magnificent," he growled, hands gripping her waist tightly, crushing the red silk. "Seeing you command that room, seeing you leave the most difficult woman in Russia speechless. Dio, Clara, that was the sexiest thing I've ever seen." "It was just a cake, Mateo," she panted, hands going up to his hair. "No. It was power." He kissed her, hungry, urgent, the adrenaline of conquest mixed with lust. "And now I want to take you far away from here. I want to take this red dress off you. I want to taste you on top of that snow if necessary. Mateo, the guests. Damn the guests. The contract is secure. The wife is happy. The Tsar is drunk." He bit her lip, pulling it slightly. "My part is over. Now ours begins." He pulled her by the hand, guiding her not back to the party, but to a discreet side exit where the car was already waiting. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, laughing as they ran through the thin snow to the heated car. "To a place where I don't have to share you with anyone," Mateo replied, opening the door for her. "And where you will discover that the Russian winter can be very, very hot." The car stopped before a dark wooden cabin, isolated in the middle of a white pine forest. It wasn't a palace like Volkov's, but it exuded a different luxury, the luxury of silence and absolute privacy. Mateo got out first and carried Clara in his arms through the deep snow to the front door, ignoring her laughing protests that she knew how to walk. "I like to carry my prizes," he said, kicking the door shut behind them and shutting out the howl of the wind. Inside, the place was the opposite of winter. A stone fireplace taking up half the wall was already lit, crackling with thick logs filling the air with the smell of pine and smoke. Thick fur rugs covered the wooden floor, and the furniture was aged leather, inviting and masculine. Mateo put Clara down but didn't let her go. He kept her trapped between his body and the warmth of the fireplace. "You are trembling again," he observed, his dark eyes gleaming in the firelight. "It's the adrenaline," Clara whispered. "I still can't believe what happened." "Mrs. Volkov," she smiled, "Mateo." She actually smiled. "You have that effect on people. You melt the ice." He slid his hand down her bare back, her skin goosebumping under his warm touch. "Mine included." He began to undo her bun, taking out the pins one by one with deliberate patience, letting her brown hair cascade over her shoulders and back. "I never wanted a woman as much as I wanted you in that hall," he confessed, his voice husky. "Seeing you wearing my color, my name implied in your presence, dominating the room with nothing but sugar and talent, it was unbearable." "Unbearable?" Clara teased, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Unbearable having to wait. Having to share your attention with that flock of vultures." He kissed her, and it wasn't the celebratory kiss from before. It was a kiss of slow, deep adoration. He undressed her right there, in front of the fireplace, the red dress falling like a pool of blood onto the white fur rug. The night in the cabin was a blur of sensations. The contrast between the cold beating against the windows and the stifling heat of intertwined bodies. The smell of burning wood, the taste of champagne he served later, and the way Mateo looked at her, as if she were the only source of light in a world of shadows. Later, lying on the rug in front of the dying embers, covered only by a thick wool blanket, a comfortable silence settled in. "What happens when we go back?" Clara asked, tracing the line of the tattoo on his arm with her fingertip. It was a complex design, a broken compass. Mateo captured her hand and kissed the palm. We go back home. You to your sweets, I to my business. Clara felt a tightness in her chest. So, that's it? An adventure in Russia and then normal life? Mateo rose on one elbow, looking at her seriously. Clara, there is no normal after this. Do you think I'm going to let you go back to that shop without me? Think I'm going to sleep in my cold bed knowing you are miles away? You bought my building, she reminded him, smiling. I'll buy the whole block if that keeps you close. But it isn't about real estate. He pulled her up to sit, the blanket slipping. I want more. I want to wake up to the smell of vanilla every day. I want to see you messy with flour in my kitchen while I drink coffee. I want my enemies to know that if they touch a hair on your head, I will burn cities. That sounds like a proposal, Mr. Moretti, Clara said, her heart beating out of rhythm. It is a promise. He held her face. I am not an easy man, Clara. My life is complicated, dangerous, and sometimes ugly. But I swear I will give you everything I have. My loyalty, my protection, my name if you want it. Just don't ask me to let you go. Because I won't. Clara looked at him, seeing the raw vulnerability behind the steel mask. She saw the boy who had grown up needing to be tough to survive, and the man who now found peace in her arms. I don't want to go, she replied, her voice firm. I chose you in the kitchen, Mateo. I chose you on the plane. And I choose you now, in the middle of nowhere in Russia. Mateo let out the breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He hugged her, burying his face in her neck, and Clara felt the tension leave his broad shoulders. Then it is decided, he murmured against her skin. Tomorrow we return to Brazil. And we start building our empire. Sugar and steel. Sounds like a dangerous combination. The best ones are. While the snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in silence, inside the cabin, two very different souls had found the perfect balance. The Russian cold couldn't touch them. They had their own fire. 6 months had passed since the night in the Russian cabin, but winter seemed like a distant memory on the sunny afternoon in Sao Paulo. Dolce Vita was no longer just a small neighborhood shop. Now, it occupied the entire ground floor of the brick building, which Mateo had meticulously renovated, keeping the original charm but injecting a dose of modernity and discreet luxury. The line at the door went around the corner. Tourists, food critics, and the Sao Paulo elite waited patiently to taste the famous Imperial Medovic, the dessert that had conquered the Russian Mafia. Clara was in the kitchen, but now she wasn't alone and covered in flour out of necessity. She commanded a team of 12 confectioners, moving between the marble counters like a conductor directing a symphony of sugar. She wore an immaculate white chef's coat, but with a new detail, her name embroidered in gold thread on the chest and, on her left hand, an emerald-cut diamond ring that captured the light with every gesture. Chef Clara, the cocoa delivery from Bahia arrived, an assistant notified. Check the temperature. If it is above 20 degrees, send it back. We accept nothing less than perfection, she replied without looking up from the chocolate tempering she was finishing. The back door, the restricted entrance, opened. The sound of conversations in the kitchen dropped instantly. The air changed. Mateo entered. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a white dress shirt with sleeves rolled up and dark trousers. He looked relaxed, but natural authority still emanated from him like heat from an oven. He nodded briefly to the team, who treated him with a mix of reverent respect and healthy terror, and went straight to Clara. He stopped behind her, ignoring the 12 people watching, and kissed the sensitive spot below her ear. The line outside is longer than at my nightclubs, he whispered, hands resting on her waist, possessive and familiar. I'm starting to think the candy business is more lucrative than mine. Clara smiled, tilting her head back against his shoulder. Sugar is more addictive than vice, Mateo. You should know. I know. He nibbled her neck. I am living proof. He turned her in his arms. I have a meeting in 5 minutes in the office upstairs. With Japanese investors. They are nervous. And you want me to bring coffee? Mateo laughed, shaking his head. I have secretaries for coffee, Clara. I want you. I need 5 minutes of recharge. Mateo, I am working. The ganache. The ganache can wait. The owner of the building can't. He pulled her by the hand, guiding her out of the kitchen, up the private stairs leading to the office he had built on the 2nd floor. It was his command center now, strategically positioned above her kingdom. As soon as the office door closed, isolating the sound of the shop, Mateo pressed her against the solid wood. The kiss was urgent, deep, tasting of longing, even though they had had breakfast together hours before. You drive me crazy, he murmured against her mouth, hands going up to mess up the perfect chef bun. Staying down there, watching you command all that, seeing how they respect you, it is the most exciting thing in my day. Do they respect me because I'm good, or because they know my husband is Mateo Moretti? She teased, fingers unbuttoning the first button of his shirt. They respect you because you are good. Mateo held her hands, kissing the diamond ring. They represent fear of me. It is an important distinction. The respect is yours, Clara. All of it. I just ensure no one gets in your way. He took her to the large glass desk overlooking the busy street below. He sat in the high-backed leather chair and pulled Clara onto his lap. It was there, in that balance, that they functioned. The world outside saw the ruthless businessman and the successful confectioner. But there, in that room, they were just a man and a woman who had found the missing piece in the puzzle of their lives. The Japanese. Clara reminded him, running her hand through his beard. They can wait 2 more minutes. Mateo closed his eyes at her touch, sighing. You know, I was thinking. The building next door is for sale. Clara laughed. Mateo, no. We just renovated this one. I was thinking of a school. A confectionery school. With your name. You teach, I manage. Clara stopped. She looked at him, seeing the seriousness in his dark eyes. He wasn't just giving her expensive gifts, he was building a legacy for her. He was thinking about her future with the same intensity he planned his global businesses. A school, she whispered. You have golden hands, Clara. It would be a crime not to pass that on. And... He hesitated, something rare, and placed his hand over her belly, a protective and hopeful gesture. I want our children to see what their mother built. Not just what their father conquered with brute force. Clara's heart skipped a beat. They hadn't officially spoken about children yet, but the idea hung in the air, sweet and inevitable. Our children will know how to cook and negotiate, she said, covering his hand with hers. They will be dangerous in the kitchen and in the boardroom. Mateo smiled, that disarmed smile only she saw. Sugar and steel. The perfect combination. The desk intercom buzzed. The secretary announced the Japanese had arrived. Mateo didn't move immediately. He gave Clara one more lingering kiss, sealing the silent promise between them. Go, she said, standing up and adjusting her chef's coat. Go conquer Japan. I have 300 eclairs to fill. At 8 p.m., he asked, already shifting his posture to shark mode. At 8 p.m. At home. I'll cook. No, Mateo corrected, opening the door for her. Tonight, I'll order pizza. Tonight, I just want to eat you. Clara left the office with flushed cheeks and a smile that lit up the whole hallway. As she went down to her kitchen, to the smell of vanilla and chocolate, she knew it didn't matter how many ovens broke, how many difficult contracts arose, or how many winters came. She had found eternal warmth. And life, which was once just a bitter struggle, was now, finally and irrevocably, sweet. The end.